Hi, welcome back to Gaijin 50 Plus. We just got word that the Japanese government has announced its guidelines for revoking permanent residence of its foreign citizens. This was something that was expected, that these guidelines would come out, and a lot of people went crazy about them. The mainstream media, which was anti-Takaichi, virtually out of the gate, started accusing the new administration of being nationalistic and racist and xenophobic. And there are a lot of Gaijin YouTubers who went on the air saying, oh, this is going to be terrible. We're all going to lose our permanent residence. And they were predicting all kinds of catastrophe was waiting around the corner. But a quick look at the actual guidelines shows that they're pretty mild, to tell you the truth. A lot of words. The word revocation is in there, but in order to get your permanent status revoked, you would have to really, really screw up badly, and the government would have to be able to prove that you have malicious intent and that there were no extenuating circumstances that kept you from paying. According to a Mainichi English news story back in 2024, about 10% of Japan's permanent residents don't pay taxes or their social insurance premiums. 10% sounds like a lot. There are 880,000 approximately foreign permanent residence holders in Japan, so that makes 90,000 people. How does that stack up against the general population? Well, the only numbers I was able to find about that was that 94% of Japanese pay their social insurance premiums. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find out any kind of numbers about taxes, but I imagine it would probably be probably the same, probably less than the foreign residents. So this is a bone of contention among Japanese people who believe that these foreign residents are living off the Japanese populace, living off Japanese taxes without paying their fair share. What are the criteria for revocation? Well, according to the draft guidelines, revocation will only apply if both of the following conditions are met. The individual fails to make payment, and the failure was not due to some unavoidable circumstances such as illness, disaster, or unemployment. Number two, the individual knowingly neglects payment obligations. However, cases where payment notices were not received or the obligation was unclear will be excluded. And even when these criteria are met, revocation will not occur automatically. Authorities will limit the measure to cases deemed malicious, such as when there are repeated or large-scale non-payments, or when there is a clear lack of willingness to fulfill obligations. There's also a consideration for humanitarian causes. In cases involving serious illness or other humanitarian circumstances, the ISA may instead change the individual's status to long-term resident rather than outright revoking their residency entirely. Note that past non-payment is also subject to review. That is to say, because the revised law does not include transitional provisions, non-payment prior to April 2027 could also be subject to revocation. However, residents who settle their dues before implementation or demonstrate good faith will not be penalized. You know, personally, I think all of these conditions and this malicious intent provision takes a lot of the teeth out of these proposed guidelines. And I tend to think that they may have been added as an initial softening of the guidelines. The government didn't want to come out with hardcore guidelines and have the world react and say, oh, Japanese government, bunch of racists and xenophobes and everything else under the sun, as the mainstream media tends to do and as world bodies tend to do, and as some Gaijin YouTubers tend to do. You know, they're really going crazy over this kind of stuff. But I suspect, and this is just my speculation, but I strongly suspect that these provisions may have been a face-saving first step to soften the provisions, get them out there, and people will say, oh, okay, you know, that sounds pretty mild and pretty gentle. get them set in place, get them set in stone, and then somewhere along the line, sometime in the future, the government will not be winning any cases at all against non-paying foreigners, and then they'll come out and say, well, these provisions are too soft, so we're going to take out the malicious intent provisions, and we're not going to let people get off so easily, and we're going to start cracking down even harder, and that's when the big crunch will come. That's, like said, is speculation. Whether this will actually happen, no one knows. I don't know. Whether these guidelines will actually result in any change in Japanese immigration policy, that's just as unclear too. Because the government and Japanese bureaucrats love to make rules and regulations and guidelines that they never enforce. I can name all kinds of examples. If you live here, you know what I mean. One of the big examples is bicycles riding on the sidewalk. We've heard for years and years the police are going to start cracking down on bicycles, and they never do. The rules after rule after rule is announced, but never enforced. So let's settle down for a while. Let's see what's going to happen. And then if things start getting bad, you'll hear about it first. You'll hear it from me because I am also a permanent resident here. And in the meantime, let's see what goes on after these guidelines are implemented. That's it for this week, and I'll see you again next time.